Big news coming in at this hour. Ahead of Russian President Putin's North Korea visit, dozens of North Korean soldiers briefly crossed the heavily fortified border with the south, but retreated after Seoul's military fired warning shots towards them. This, according to South Korean news agency. And this is the second such incursion in just 2 weeks. South Korea says dozens of North Korean troops invaded the military demarcation line and retreated northwards after warning shots were fired by the south. The South Korean news agency also said that several North Korean soldiers working near the heavily fortified border with the south were injured in a landmine explosion. North Korean military suffered multiple casualties due to a mine explosion during work, it said, without giving further details. The border between the two countries is heavily mined. Now, the tensions in the Korean peninsula are escalating just when Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to make a friendly visit to North Korea. It is his first visit to Pyongyang in 24 years. Putin will meet Kim Jong-un during his 2-day visit. All right, we are being joined by Voice of America correspondent William Gallo, who's live from Seoul. William, thank you for joining in. Now, Putin's visit to North Korea, it's being closely watched, especially at the back of the Russia-Ukraine war. What should one expect out of this visit?
I think you should expect both sides to further expand their economic cooperation. We'll probably see some sort of deal related to North Korean labor going into Russia, things like that. It's also almost certain that this trip will result in further defense cooperation, possibly weapons sales between the two sides. It's not really for sure that we'll hear much about that, however, because both sides have denied that a lot of that's going on. However, they have acknowledged there is some Russian help with North Korea's satellite program. So you may get some statements on that. And then I'd say the other thing to watch here is that both sides really have an interest in portraying the perception of support for each other. They may sign some documents that may either in practice or sort of in symbolism say that they have each other's back, but there's good reason to doubt that this will go very far, even though both sides will very likely give the perception that they're here for each other, they're fighting together against the West.
Bill, now there are reports of the South Korean military firing warning shots after North Korean soldiers crossed the demarcation line. What's the latest on that front, if you can give us a roundup?
Yes, this should be seen in the context of sort of rising tensions in the Korean peninsula in recent weeks. Both sides have actually taken steps to do away with an inter-Korean military agreement. And basically what that means is there's a lot more military stuff happening on this very tense border. On the North Korean side, there have been observations via satellite photos, and the South Korean military has also confirmed it. There is all kinds of activity going on the border. North Korea seems to be building, in some cases, something like a barrier. Of course, it's restoring a lot of border posts there. There is even a question of maybe whether they're going to build an actual wall between the two sides. It's also important to know that this is the DMZ. It's not a demilitarized zone, despite its name. It's full of landmines, and apparently North Korea, in doing some of these provocative acts in this area, has actually triggered some of these landmines, causing casualties. That's according to South Korea's military. We don't know how many have been injured or killed. We don't know how exactly this happened. But this is the second time that we've seen North Korean soldiers actually cross this middle line within the DMZ in the last 2 weeks, as you've mentioned. So it's really worth keeping an eye on this moving forward.
Bill, in the last 2 weeks or the weeks prior to that as well, we saw balloon garbage wars, rather those balloons full of garbage and a lot of other things as well, making their way into South Korea around the DMZ, as you mentioned. And of course, that has turned the DMZ even more sensitive. How are things on that front, if you could elaborate a little further on that?
Well, we haven't seen a round of North Korean waste balloons here in a few days, which I think is a positive sign. The South Korean government is actually trying to work with activist groups here, really to convince them to, hey, maybe we shouldn't be sending these balloons north, because this was the original complaint of North Korea, and this is why they are said to be sending these sort of poop and trash-filled balloons to the south. You know what? It seems like that front has actually calmed in recent days. Although it's far from certain that this has actually calmed for good, because these are activists on the South Korean side who very much want to get outside information into North Korea, and they have vowed to continue those launches to the north.
Bill, coming back to Putin's visit to North Korea, what would be South Korea's key concerns here, and how would South Korea be looking at this visit?
Yeah, I think one of the major concerns that South Korea has is that Russia would provide advanced weapons for North Korea's ballistic missile programs, for their nuclear weapons programs. We don't know that that's happening. U.S. officials won't even say for sure that that's happening, but they suspect there is some consideration there, that this is a possibility. This would be very bad for South Korea for many obvious reasons. I mean, North Korea represents a direct, ongoing threat to South Korea, but there's also this question of how far the two sides will go in sort of evading sanctions on North Korea. Actually, we heard Putin actually today in a letter published in North Korean state media just flat out acknowledge we're going to work together to counter sanctions. This is a serious problem for South Korea. It is important to note, too, that South Korea has a lot of leverage here. It's a major, major weapons producer. So far, it has sort of straddled the line when it comes to arming Ukraine. That's some leverage that South Korea may choose to use in the future, depending on what happens here this week.
Absolutely. From the east to the west, all eyes are going to be tuned in and would be watching carefully on what happens when Putin makes his way to North Korea. Thank you so much for getting us all those insights. That was Bill Gallo, Voice of America correspondent, joining us from Seoul.
Thank you.